like this, man. He's like a butterfly flapping his wings deep down in the forest, man. It's gonna cause a tree fall like 5,000 miles away, man. There ain't nobody seeing nobody. Man, see, like, you don't even know, man. It's like you're born into this world, man. And you got like that, man. The dust and wind, man. Or like the dang old candle, man. It don't matter, man. It's like this all the time.
All right, Rod Dodson, welcome back to the Jay Burden Show. How you doing, man?
I'm doing well. Thanks for having me again.
Yeah, I'm really excited to have you back on. I think that you and I have the largest disparity between number of episodes recorded and time spent talking together. You know, you and I talk at least once a week, bounce a lot of ideas off each other. So I'm very excited to have you back on. What I want to do this time is explore three trends in kind of the roughly, conservative evangelical world that are on their face not related, but I think there's a common thread between them. The first is what we've recently seen with the people who call themselves the abortion abolitionists. So that is a group. It's a movement that is obviously extremely devoted to opposing abortion, right? That's something I think is laudable. But they recently made the news by saying, we as a group won't vote for Trump because he's not pure enough. He's not anti-abortion enough. We will only support, the most extreme position possible. And if it's not that, we won't do it. Okay, so that's one of our camps. Another one is this other camp. We'll call them evangelicals, right? Which is people who have left evangelical Christianity and become progressives. Some of them have just out and out apostatized. Others have sort of decided to make this weird syncretic religion where they decide that really the true purpose of Christianity is 2024 electoral politics. And then the last is the response to Daryl Cooper's appearance on Tucker. And much ink has been spilled on that interview. It's very, very good. I highly encourage everyone listening to go check it out. But in that interview, he presents a, shall we say, light revisionist take on World War II. Namely, that Winston Churchill was a villain, right? He's not a hero. And take what you will. I think if you've made it this far down the rabbit hole, nothing discussed in that interview will be new information. The venue is very new. The reaction is very new. And I actually have spoken about that on Thomas's current events show, which, you know what, I'll link down there. But what's interesting, like I said, is the reaction, specifically the reaction from conservative Christians, people like the people behind the Babylon Bee. Pick your choice of, kind of traditional, conservative influencers has been freaking out, just losing their mind, talking about the rise of the woke right, the barbarian right. And so all three of these camps are on their face unrelated. But I think that there's kind of a through line through all of those. And I realize I've just been monologuing at you for the last 3 minutes, Ron. But what do you think about this topic more generally?
Well, I mean, I'm not going to bury the lead here. I really believe this is all related. This is a Puritan. This tracks with the development and death of societal Puritanism that happened in this country. Same kind of deal. Entrance into this country with zeal, with fervor, lots of pietism that was sincere. And honestly, I don't question much of I don't question the sincerity really in any of these three camps. Honestly, I think we're dealing with some metaphysical issues here, but the idea behind Puritanism is that you can purify the group. In this case, it was the American church before the eschaton, before the end, before Christ comes and separates wheat and chaff, sheep and goats, so on and so forth. that always, and I'd love to hear an example if it's not always, leads to purity spirals and factionalism, and ultimately just an unbelief in the whatever the driving force was to begin with. In the case of the original Puritans, they devolved after a while into Congregationalist and then Unitarians, and now it's not much of anything. There's not really a Northeast Puritan existence. Puritanism, the pietistic movement, has been somewhat rekindled by Southern Presbyterianism a little bit, but that's a mixed bag. But to me, what ties all these things together is a religious, puritanical view of the world and the sociological construct of groups. Your turn.
Yeah, I think that you're correct there, because in all of this, there's this desire to be. I think the phrase that you used when we discussed this on the phone was holier than God.
Yes.
Right? The idea to be kind of ultimately pure. So let's
Right.
take the first example, right? The abortion abolitionists.
Right.
I have almost no patience for these people for a variety of reasons. Let's start off with one. I have never voted for Donald Trump, although I will in this next election. And I'll be honest, I don't have a great reason other than the fight, fight, fight moment was iconic. But if I was the kind of person who decided to establish a thought out rationale for why I voted for him, the fact that he got Roe versus Wade struck down is a pretty good reason. And if you are this hypothetical one issue voter, right, abortion is it's the only variant in that equation. Surely, if someone accomplishes the stated goal of your movement, right, which is to strike down this piece of law, through his Supreme Court justices, then surely you owe that person something, right? And I think that what we saw there is that for a great many people in that industry, effectively, that's not what they wanted. It was kind of useful to have Roe versus Wade around, right? It was nice to have something to fight against.
Right. And that's that you're mentioning, possibly the insincere faction, which is just griftianity driven, so to speak. But go ahead, keep going. I like where you're going with this.
So that's one camp, right? Let's hope at least that the insincere, right, the desire to just use this as a way to accrue power and money is small. All right, let's say it is. But for the rest, right, the looking at that and deciding, you know what, that isn't good enough. You've got to earn me going forward by taking what's effectively a position of electoral suicide. Now, saying, I think that there should be no abortions. I mean, that's what I think.
Mm-hmm.
But if you say that, you will lose. And if you lose, there will be more abortions, right? Assuming what each candidate says is true. And so to me, looking at that and turning that into a bizarre purity test, it's incredibly short-sighted. And to me, I think it comes from a fundamental misunderstanding about how power and politics works. So I had an unfortunate Twitter digression. I'm recently sick. You can probably hear it in my voice. So that means I did absolutely nothing over the weekend except for fall into a weird Twitter rabbit hole of the people who kind of surround James Lindsay, right? And so they have these kind of bizarre infographics, which I will probably discuss on a stream that will come out before this episode does. Mapping out the so-called woke right, the evil, bad, scary right. And one of the things that maps you out as being an outsider, a bad person, is the phrase, the right doesn't understand how to use power, which is really stupid because the right literally doesn't understand how to use power. This is manifestly true. And this example is the perfect example, right? Okay, you've got one win. What is your step two? Well,
right.
I'm going to do something that will completely negate all of the advantages I've gotten because it's not pure enough. It's incredibly sorry, Ron. I realize it's an interview and it's turned into me just ranting at you. But
No, not at all. I didn't want it to be an interview. I wanted it to be back and forth. So let's talk about a couple of examples, one ancient and one contemporary. And let's talk about the contemporary example to begin with. Let's say that we got some political leverage, which I think we have with China. And I know too much about that topic. I could go on and waste all our time, but let's just talk about China and Taiwan for a second. And let's say that that the right was very, very principally moved towards an absolute pure Taiwan that had not only wouldn't be invaded, but was completely free of all Chinese influence. And President X, whoever he or she may be, signs a treaty with Taiwan with China that says the current positions in the South China Sea and with Taiwan will remain stagnant for the next 50 years, let's say. And then a group turns around and says, that's not good enough. We need to attack China. We need to just go after them. Or even as the current situation might be, we need to go start a world war with China right now. That's insane. That would be insane, but it's similar. We have just gained the most ground. If you believe abortion is immoral, if you believe it's violating God's law, if you think it's icky, if you think it's murder, all those subcategories, you were just handed an amazing victory, and but did all that you could possibly do in a realistic circumstance, which is send it to the states. We are like it or not, no matter what that Constitution says, we are a federal democracy in reality, even though we should be a federal republic that holds to this higher law, but we're not. And presidents have very limited power on this. They can't executive order their way through this. So what you're going to have is some type of amendment, constitutional convention, something along those lines. And it can't be brought about in a democratic way because, like it or not, the people are far from the heart of God on this matter. Women want the majority of women of childbearing age want the option of having an abortion. And sadly, that is their democratic option to express at the voting. That's just the way it is. You can't wish it away. So Trump, to me, has won the most amazing victory with the decision, the SCOTUS decision. I had another example and an ancient example. It's really about how the Pharisees knew that just basic faithfulness and keeping the very simple law in the Torah, people were still going to fall away. So they created this oral law tradition that was impossible to keep. So nominalism just rose even further. And it was such a cell phone, not a cell phone, but a self-own that Jesus just hammers on it in the Gospels about the hypocrisy of the Pharisees. And that's what he's talking about. And I see the exact same thing here. You have this ability. Look, now it's much easier in whatever state you're in. Hey, talk to your local your state representative, your state senator, the vote for good judges. You have the opportunity now to actually exert moral power here, and it's not good enough because it's never good enough, and that's the problem. So anyway, now I've monologued for however long it's been.
No, and I think that this connects to our third example as well, right? Which is the third example, right, being the reaction to Daryl Cooper's interview, right? And
the interview that was on Tucker Carlson, If you haven't watched it, highly recommended. It's a captivating 2 hours.
And the reaction to that has been absolutely hysterical. I mean, just completely insane. And to me, my mind went back to earlier over the summer at the start of the Olympics, right? For those who don't remember this kind of scandal of the last few months, there was the opening ceremony to the Paris Olympics featured a lot of extremely anti-Christian and vaguely satanic imagery, right?
Mm-hmm.
And the tone for many of these people who would later be freaking out about Daryl's work was just calm down. You uppity backwoods Christian, you have no idea. This has been going on for a long time. It's just a part of living in a multicultural society. So okay,
Right.
let's take that example. That is from a biblical perspective, blasphemy, right? You describe yourself as this being your ultimate priority in life, and when that is blasphemed, it's simply part of existing in a civilized society. Now, fast forward.
And interestingly, you had non-Christian secularists who were taking the Christian point of view on that with their outrage. They're like, wait a minute, aren't we in the West kind of based on Christianity? Isn't this kind of wrong? But you're exactly right. It was a lot of the Christians going, what, hey, relax, keep going. Sorry.
So we have that, right? That kind of past data point. And fast forward, right, to the last week. And what do we hear when this is a matter of history, right? Supposedly something that is completely secularized. Do we see the same measured response of, oh, well, that's your opinion? But I mean, I'm sort of showing my hand here. No, it was complete and total insanity. They completely lost their minds.
Yes.
And it wasn't the way that you'd lose your mind if someone said some incorrect fact about history, right? Like if Ron, you and I are talking and I'm saying, you know what? I just, I don't believe in, the country of Finland. Finno-Jap, it just didn't happen. You could be like, hey, that's weird, but whatever. Like you'd think I was maybe a little bit stupid, but it's not something
like
you'd get upset about.
when you deal with a flat earther or a moon landing denier or whatever it is.
Exactly. At worst, it would be kind of off-putting.
Right.
But to me, what you saw was blasphemy, right? Someone was, impugning the honor of the state religion of the Nuremberg regime. And that is the traditional narrative of World War II. And I think that's a really interesting data point that these devoutly religious people who describe themselves as Christian first and foremost are much, much more outraged about the state religion, right? This kind of like secular myth of history than they are about their professed religious beliefs. Do you see what I'm getting at there, Ron?
Oh, it's manifestly true. This is what is truly religious now in the West, and religion, religare, to bind together. This is what binds the West together among the elite, among it's the cathedral, as Curtis Yarvin would say, whatever your metaphor. This is the religious dogma, and it's treated with much more reverence than true actual religion. I'm and I think it ties. I've heard some the inklings of some good stuff come out about this, tying it to some of the insights Gerard had about mimetic desire and the blood sacrifice, and I think a lot of it really is tied into that. I don't know how deep in the weeds we want to go here, but
No, keep going.
well, so Gerard wrote about three main things in this vein. He wrote about mimetic desire, and that's really the idea that the human desires are not entirely self-generated. They're not autonomous, but imitative. And so in this post-war consensus narrative, the U.S. embodies the ideal of freedom and democracy, which other nations are then encouraged to mime, to express this mimetic desire with. So the U.S. sets itself as this model to be followed, and the other nations are to be like America. Now, the problem is that this becomes a spiral in and of itself. So you now go to, you mentioned Finland. I haven't been to Finland, so I can't speak to that. But you go to London and you see in the suburbs of England, you see Starbucks and McDonald's. Are Starbucks and McDonald's English? Maybe England's kind of the source of a lot of this. So maybe we should, in Paris, or in the outskirts of the French countryside, and the French are very self-identifying people, and yet you still see these same aspects of this mimetic desire being exhibited. The second thing was that Gerard talked about was scapegoating and sacrifice, and he says that societies create a unity via the scapegoat. And this should make you immediately, if you're a Christian who knows your Old Testament at all, this should make you think of the Day of Atonement or Yom Kippur ceremonies, although there's a twist there that we'll get to, hopefully. But in the context of this post-war order, the scapegoats could be seen as the Axis powers, and Nuremberg was the religious ceremony to send them out, the scapegoat out into, you had one that was sacrificed and one was basically sent out into the wilderness. And so the defeat of the Nazis, let's say, followed by the Cold War and communism, although that's another twist. The narrative would be basically, these are the obstacles to global peace that the U.S. and English sacrifice basically was able to put the scapegoat punishment on. And then the last thing is this mythologizing of violence Gerard talked about. And Gerard says that myths obscure the grandiose nature of the myth, obscures the violence that's truly on display. So, this is what really gets it for me, where I think Gerard, absolute prophet, and not in speaking of the future, but just in speaking truth. If the Churchill, and that's what Daryl was mainly, the uproar's been about with Churchill. If Churchill's main holy goal was to keep an evil regime from controlling a large swath or even half of Europe, he failed miserably. If his goal was to keep the honor and integrity, and in literal integrity of its borders of the British Empire, he failed miserably. And in the process, mythologized untold. Go look at one of the dot plots, where the size of the dot refers to magnitude of the wars throughout history, and then you see this eclipse at the end, which is World War II. The magnitude of the death that we participated in as well, absolutely astounding. So I think Gerard really speaks into this, and I know Daryl that doesn't surprise me that Daryl has these insights, which aren't all that new. I mean, Pat Buchanan wrote about this in the early 90s, but Gerard really speaks into this. Okay. That was a massive monologue. I think I set the record.
No, you have no idea. So going back to that idea of sacrifice, and scapegoating, it's something that, everyone old enough to listen to this will be very, very familiar with during the pandemic. Right, that there is this sort of, scapegoating of the unvaccinated, right? You're killing grandma, You're why this has to keep going on. And that created, and I mean, I saw it happen, right? A sort of moral unity of, you know, the people who were kind of swept up by this. And
It's
to
really
me,
good.
I think it's fascinating to watch, you know, this idea of, or watch this idea being challenged, because one of the core myths of the post-war consensus is this idea of, you know, objective, nonpartisan institutions, right? You know, that
The-
we don't
yeah,
have a
the
state
myth of
religion.
democracy.
Exactly. And, you know, this is something that leftists will say all the time. It's like, oh, that movie wasn't, it's not that movie was apolitical. You just agreed with the politics. And they're actually on to something, right? When we look back at a time in which there wasn't political debate, or life wasn't as politicized as it is now, we weren't seeing a society with no politics. We were seeing a more unified society, right? A society where those priors were widely agreed upon. And one, that is no longer the society we find ourselves in. And two, if we are Christians, right, if we have sort of outsourced our, you know, our priors, right, to something outside of ourselves, then why should we care, you know, about a secular political religion? You know, to me, right, this reaction, Daryl, like, it really reminds me of kind of the early persecutions of the church, in the sense that, okay, realistically, what does saying Churchill was evil do to the US government? Literally nothing, right? Just saying that they're still there. You know, I've said it twice on this episode, and I still have to pay taxes. Similarly, you know, what does refusing to, you know, offer a pinch of incense at the imperial altar do to the Roman Empire? Absolutely nothing, right? Their legions are still there. You know, they're still going to win a fight, but it is blasphemy, you know. And so I see very much in this a sense of dual loyalties. And to me, I find that very frustrating from people who loudly proclaim themselves to be first and foremost religious. And look, don't get me wrong, everyone is human. We all have, you know, complicated dual loyalties, right? That's not my point. But to me, it's so frustrating to watch someone bring, you know, take this effectively a, you know, historical or political debate, and, you know, take it to the point of this kind of like salvific issue. Do you see what I'm getting at there, Ron?
I do. I think that's really good. Okay, I'm going to play the part of interviewer. Why do you think that is? And what character manifestation of God, the God that's being held up by this American post-war or whatever, what characteristic of God is being upheld there? Why do you think that is, and what do you think's going on there?
For sure. I think that at the most basic level, what we're seeing is that conservatism is not a real ideology, right? It's basically a temperament, right? It's a desire to have things go along roughly the same as they are now because I'm relatively comfortable. And an
Because it's
idea,
good for business.
Exactly. Mixed with the fact that I think for the vast majority of human history, your agreeableness was directly correlated with your religiousness, right? There are obviously strong negative examples, right? You could look at someone like Paul, right? Highly disagreeable guy, you know, very religious, pick your poison. But if you live in a world where that civic religion and Christianity are very closely married, right? In the sense that, you know, if you were a heretic in Spain, you would be tried by the church, turned over to the secular authorities, and then killed, because it was seen that church and state were linked very closely.
Yes.
So it makes sense, right, that you are the kind of person who does what the authorities tell you to do. You will be religious. And I think that carried on very, very well up until pick your poison, right? At some point, Aaron Wrenn has this a similar idea. And once the kind of core consensus of the country shifted from, let's just say a broadly Protestant ethic, right? The kind where, okay, maybe you go to a Methodist church and, someone else's dad, is the pastor, the Baptist church, but you go to school together and there's enough common ground there that you can have a society together. Well, once that goes away, right? Well, what do people do who are naturally go along to get along types, right? Who want to do the right thing? Well, they follow that. You've already seen this very strongly in the mainline Protestant denominations, right? They have basically become social clubs for libtards with a little bit of Jesus sprinkled on top. And I think
rainbow Unitarians.
Yes. And what I think you're seeing is red America is lagging behind blue America. And we are seeing red Americans shifting in the same way along with the mores of red America, right? They're becoming more comfortable with things that their parents would not have been, and I think that because many of these people are not highly disagreeable, and there are notable exceptions to this, we can think of many of our friends who are highly disagreeable, who are not putting up with it. And I think that's part of the reason that the Orthodox get through this relatively easily, is because it is by definition an extreme minority movement. But I think that, if you go to church because that's what good people do, and all of a sudden the definition of good people changes, you're probably more likely to follow that than the church, or maybe the whole church goes along with you. I think that's part of it. Now, speaking to the nature of God, right? I think that, these people are speaking to genuine Christian virtues of, for instance, hospitality, right? My most recent episode with, my friend Lou Templar is very much about this. And when I say most recent, it's like been 4 or 5 months now. I need to have him back on. But when we talked about the parable of the Good Samaritan, and his point is that has been wildly misconstrued, right? Of course, there's an idea of hospitality that you'll find throughout the entire Western tradition from both Jerusalem and Athens, right?
That's right.
But within that, what does he do? Well, he picks him up. He takes him to a doctor in the country the Samaritan is from, right? He takes him back, provides for him, make sure he'll get healthy, and then says, all right, goodbye.
Right.
He's doing the exact opposite to what many of these Christian organizations are doing, which is saying we will save the world by importing literally every person ever to America.
That's
which is a slightly short-sighted tactic. So the point is, right, there is, and this is why this works, right, there are aspects of genuine Christian charity, the kind of decent behavior, right, that we would expect, that has been completely and totally perverted. And have I successfully answered that question there?
Yeah. I just want to put a name on, first of all, Good Samaritan. There's a lot more Jew Gentile going on there as well. It's, because I see the first step, I need to see the image bearing status of everyone. But just because I do see that image bearing status doesn't mean that we're going to just throw everybody in a coffee mug and shake real hard. So I love that insight that your guest had. But regarding, I just want to put a name on this God that engenders such fealty in this post-war consensus, in this cathedral-driven unity. What is it? And is it, because that to me is the real, if we can put a name on it, if we can actually identify what the God is, or in this case, a demon possibly, I would have a lot more, maybe we'd have more success in battling it, because it's certainly this civic religion. I mean, has been shown it is incredibly powerful. It is the loyalty and, like I said, fealty and call to arms power that it has is breathtaking. So I just don't, but like most things satanic, there's an amorphous quality to it. I can't put my finger on exactly, for instance, my enemies, I'm older, communism growing up. I could put my finger on a map and of who the premier was. I know who that is. With this, it's what is the telos? What's the end game? What's the goal? Is it Fukuyama's last man? Is it the end of history? Even Fukuyama's backed off. I don't know. I'm literally asking because I have a hard time really uh, finding the bullseye on the target.
Yeah, I don't know the answer to that. And I mean, I think that what we're seeing in at least all three of these cases, right, is the desire to be kind of holier than now. Now, what
Mhm.
I think that we're seeing in the case of Daryl and in the case of the evangelicals is a desire to create a kind of syncretic religion, right, and a desire to kind of slave your religion to the religion of the state in one way or another.
So
And
it's ultimately fascist.
that's a fact. Yeah, I guess you're right, technically, right? If we're talking about that idea of nothing outside the state.
Right. Of
Uh,
a Mussolini ideal. No, I think you're cooking with gas here, Jay. That makes a ton of sense to me. You're providing an apotheosis for the state. If that's what this is all about, now we've answered the question. And it's the state is, and by the state I mean the whole encompassing thing is the God.
well, and I think that exactly. And what we have in because look, like the evangelicals are they're kind of hick lib types, right? They have evangelical parents, and now they want to be kind of ultra progressive. And with these kind of more red state influencer types who are pimping out at Daryl, both of them have that desire to kind of meld their Christianity with a certain story about America.
Mhm.
But in one case we have the kind of blue America story, right? Which is America is this country of horrible racism, Civil War, MLK, World War II, all that. And then on the other side, you have the kind of like warmed over, Reaganite conservatism.
Mhm.
And you see this even in the way that they talk about the Constitution as this almost kind of divine document.
Mhm.
And obviously, there's a meme going around. I referenced it on the stream I did with Thomas, where it's sort of like the pantheon of kind of like regime Christians, right? And at the very top, you have you know uh, fake Jesus, the Constitution, the fake founding fathers, real Jesus, the real founding fathers, and then Satan is Hitler, right? The idea that you have this very kind of mixed up, kind of falsified version of what the Constitution is, what Christianity is. That's basically a desire to return to an older version of the American story. This is what Yarvin talks about in his essay, The Two-Story State, right? That we
Mhm.
have two mutually incompatible stories about America. And both of them are fake. Both of them are complete and total trash. But the advantage that the blue story has is it has power, right? The
Right.
evangelicals are pushing through an open door. They get to have the advantage of advocating for things that are already incorporated into law. When they're saying, you need to be open and accepting of homosexuals. Well, let me tell you, good thing for you, you're 10 years late to that party, you know. Whereas,
Right.
the other story is, in addition to being hamstrung by being completely and total bullshit, right, is on the losing side, right? It's the Washington Generals account of events.
That's right.
And to me, if that is your highest religion, you're kind of like ultimate end in life. Well, that's very, very depressing. But if you have, shall we say, an older, tradition to kind of hook yourself into, something that has outlasted countries before, it sort of refocuses the issue.
But this is the American religion in the pews. Even it in many cases is a loser mentality. That it's not Christus Victor. It's not Jesus who has overcome and reigns on at the throne of on the right hand of the Father. It is not the Jesus who with the Father sent forth the Spirit that is in power. The same Spirit that raised Jesus from the dead empowers you to do good things. That is not the gospel we hear. We hear a gospel that has been neutered of all politics. Therefore, it has been neutered of all practical power. And if you have a religion that is retreatist like that, it basically applied follow the Essenes are your good guys. We can put in the show notes who the Essenes were. The Essenes wrote the Dead Sea Scrolls. They basically knew that things were jacked up in Jerusalem, so they went and lived in Qumran by the Dead Sea. That's your Schoolhouse Rock version of who the Essenes are. But if that's your goal, then you're going to have this sociology, this conservative sociology of losing, of even what Sam Francis talked about, beautiful losers. So I think that is tied, and I'm just seeing, I've thought about that some, but your comments really, I think there's a lot to that. I think there's a lot to that.
Well, and this is another, I think, issue we're having, right? That there is this desire to kind of stick your head in the sand and say, well, I don't want to get my hands dirty with the gross, icky real world, right? It seems like, things are scary out there. I might have to do something unpleasant or ally myself with someone I don't, agree with, I don't think is particularly respectable in order to win. And so I will just opt out. I am holier than that, so I don't have to. And to me, I think that is a fundamental rejection of authority. One of the things that I've talked to Thomas about, right, is this idea of the different commands and callings for you as an individual, Ron, and for a leader of men, right? Someone who has power. Because fundamentally, if you run a country the way you would act in kind of an in-group interpersonal setting, like if I came over for dinner, you wouldn't have a country, right? It would completely and totally fall apart.
That's right.
You require in the great game of politics ruthlessness, right? The ability to do things which are in a different context wrong.
That's
and
right.
The reason that is commendable, right? The reason that is something that can be, forgiven is because, well, you're doing it for something, right? You're doing it for your people.
Yeah, it's the legal miracle. The Schmidt called the legal miracle in the example would be Solomon with the cutting the baby in half. That's not in the law. That would be completely against the law, the Torah. So anyway, go on. That's good stuff.
Well, and again, the reason that is laudable and commendable is you are doing it for your people, right? What we would rightly understand as your neighbors, right? You are sacrificing, a piece of your soul, a piece of your innocence to do something, right? There's a real cost to that, but it is ultimately redemptive, right? You were taking on that, weighty action on behalf of someone else. And to me, again, going back to this, kind of abortion issue, the premise, okay, abortion is murder, got it. But I don't want to do something distasteful and socially disadvantageous that would meaningfully decrease the number of abortions because it would be gross and icky. It's like, well, okay, like either it's murder or it's not.
Right.
And if you think it is, well, a marginal decision where you could go from, and look, I'm under no disillusions whatsoever that Trump will, you know, will create a state where there are zero abortions. But let's just say that, a Kamala presidency would, increase, the level. If we could have, that federally enshrined, or just keep it the same, and Trump might decrease it. Well, that's fewer murders. And I realize fewer murders aren't zero, but fundamentally we're in the real world. And I realize that might be icky and gross. And, the people at your dinner parties might think that you're, one of the gross chuds, but it's like, to me, it's a profoundly kind of, weak way to look at the world. Do you see what I'm kind of picking at there?
Well, I absolutely do. And the example that comes to mind from the Old Testament law is the punishment for homosexuality was stoning to death in the law. Yet we have no record in the scriptures or even in the extra scriptural accounts of Israel of anyone being stoned for homosexuality. Now, if your argument is that no one ever committed a homosexual act, I think that's laughable. The idea is that good law drives aberrant behavior underground. You will never, until Jesus returns, completely do away with abortions. And so this turns into a bit of a shibboleth. I mean, when I was, not you, but when I was young, there were still the echoes of the story. I mean, Roe was brand new brand new when I started. That decision came out when I was in first grade. And I remember hearing hush stories of, the coat hanger thing. I went to a public school. So, the point is that good law minimizes through shame and driving bad behavior underground, but you're never going to completely eradicate it. The heart of man is just what it is. It's sinful. So I think, again, we get back to this Puritan example that somehow through the right incantation, because that's what it is, it becomes kind of a magic thing. It's either magic or Gnostic, pick your poison, that if we just say the right words, then everything is better. And that is farce. That's not what the Bible says. It's just not going to happen. It's not reality. So let's say you're purely a materialist. You just look at these things on a pragmatic level. So the abortion thing to me is exactly where it needs to be, because it provides the opportunity for people who are convinced and convicted Christians to select and congregate where people of like mind are, which was exactly the Madison's idea in writing the Constitution. When you read his letters, he speaks of the factionalism is just reality, and we can't have any one group being too powerful. And this at least gives people the opportunity to congregate under like mind and custom. So, that's where I am on the abortion thing, and I think it's a heinous evil. So,
well, to go back to your point about law, so many people have this completely incorrect assumption about how law and public consensus works, and abortion is actually a great example. Actually, I'll go with Obergefell because that's more recent and more dramatic. Right?
mm-hmm.
We have this idea kind of presented in popular culture that there's this ground swelling of kind of public anger around an issue. We need to get a law passed. This is kind of the Schoolhouse Rock version, right? Second time we'll mention that of that idea. And eventually there's enough public support that someone drafts a bill, becomes a law. Well, one, that's not how this happened, right? None of these were laws. They were Supreme Court decisions. And when these decisions were made, they were unpopular, right? gay marriage was roughly 60-40 against
Right.
when it was enshrined. And
Right.
then shortly afterwards, what do we see? That begins to reverse. Right now that
Sure
it's
does.
legal, people approve of it. You see a
That's right.
similar thing around, marijuana, right? That it becomes, people, see it as more legitimate once it becomes legal. People
Right.
get used to it and now can't imagine the world without it.
That's right. Why did the Jews not eat shrimp? Because it tasted bad? No, because it would be like us eating, I would say a cat, but evidently that's changing. No, it'd be like us eating what we have commonly as pets. It's just it offends our very being because of the custom that has been set, and the law functions as that vanguard, proclaiming what is acceptable. It but it doesn't guarantee the changing of every individual heart. So
Well,
it's incapable of doing that.
and to that point, right? When people say, like, oh, restrictions on abortion are incredibly unpopular. Okay, true, but many other things have been very unpopular and then have become popular after they were legal. And so to me, this idea
That's
that,
right.
public,
Homosexuality itself used to be a punchline.
well,
And we
right.
all knew that there were and my just personal story. My stepmother had her own salon. Everybody who worked for her was homosexual. I got along with them. I got along with them fine, even though we disagreed about worldview. It wasn't that, but it was back in the day a bit of a punchline, and now it's a holy sacred class above. It's it's this intersectionality, right, of these different suffering classes that have gained such status. So
Well, exactly. And so to me, right, and I realize this has been a long, rambly conversation between the two of us, Ron, but it,
that's okay. This is really good. Maybe somebody else will enjoy it. If not,
well, I'll put it this way. I don't listen to my audience, so I don't even know if they do or not. But point is, right, I think that all three of these camps are sort of emblematic of, core problems of, American Christianity and American conservatism. And, as much fun as it is, and I have certainly had a lot of fun doing it, dunking on these people, I think that it is useful to examine them and to examine the pitfalls in what they do and what they think, because they're very, very common, and it's easier to see them in sort of a closely connected out group, right? I mean, I go to church with many of these people, right? These are people I'm very comfortable around, but nonetheless, they are, making severe, grave mistakes. And so I think that this is, hopefully for that, if no other reason, kind of a worthwhile conversation.
Well, it's ancient. Look at the passion narrative. What is ultimately claimed by, here's Jesus, who is commanding, every time he speaks, thousands are coming to listen to him. The Bible records these miracles of love and graciousness and so on and so forth. And then the ruling party basically accuses him of sedition because their one God is the state. This is an ancient uh, sin or temptation of established elite power, is to make not a transcendent call to virtue, the ultimate that which is compelling you to get up in the morning, but instead to deify the structure that you live in. In other words, it's to make there's a sense in which, not I'm going to repeat myself. I think it's an apotheosis of the current structure, and that's an old temptation that people fall into over and over and over again. I don't think this is something new. I think the manifestations are very new, but I don't think the sin is something that has suddenly surprised and shocked God, so to speak.
Well, definitely, Ron. We are fast coming up on time. I really enjoyed this conversation. It was a lot of fun. But if people want to find more of your work, what's a good way for them to do that?
Well, I write at my Substack, which is just my name and then Substack, easy to find. You can find me on Twitter. And then I write long form pieces for American Reformer. That's in addition to what I write occasionally on my Substack. That's probably the best way. And American Reformer is certainly, and I don't get paid, so this isn't self-serving, but they are worth supporting. The freedom that with which bounded by faithfulness to the Bible and the creeds, and basically a reformed version of those things. It's worth supporting, and so that's really where you can find me: American Reformer, Twitter, and Substack.
Well, I highly recommend your articles. I think they're quite good. Those will be linked down in the description. As far as my stuff, you can find the Jay Burden Show on Apple, Spotify, YouTube, anywhere you listen to podcasts. I have a T-shirt now, which I have still not opened the link to see, but my sources assure me it is quite good. So if you want it, you can check it out. And then Axios Remote Fitness and Coaching, our sponsor. I've actually been getting some very good reviews off that, guys who've been kind of, a few cycles in and are really happy about it, which is great. Look, like, obviously I make a little bit of money from Axios, not a ton. JD is a personal friend of mine, which is why he's my sponsor. But I'll be honest, the real reason is that, there are a lot of you guys who could use some physical fitness, and no one, myself included, who has made that lifestyle change has ever regretted it. So there's the plug for Axios. Again, Ron, thanks for coming on. And everyone at home, keep your head up. A lie can't last forever. Good night.